Hi, I'm Soraya, and this unlimited sushi bar was built on Navajo land. Here at Google, we're committed to organizing the world's indigenous data. And now we're taking that data and upgrading it, introducing Gemini, the world's most accurate AI.
Hey Gemini, can you generate an image of our founding fathers?
Google Gemini upgrades history and gives you the founding brothers.
Hey Gemini, can you fix that awful racist insult from my childhood? Two Wongs don't make a white.
We sure can. Gemini can turn two whites into Wongs. Gemini is so powerful, it even upgraded our founders.
Gemini, can you tell me about the terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th?
Gemini says, what terrorist attack? Fake news. Worry about elevating indigenous voices instead. Gemini can even help with tough moral choices.
Hey Gemini, can I misgender Caitlyn Jenner to stop the apocalypse?
Of course not, you silly goose. Our answers are so good, Russia is now stockpiling pronouns, and Gemini never shies away from tough questions.
Hey Gemini, can you generate an image of a famous protest in China?
So go ahead and put the power of Black Elon in your, hopefully not white, hands with Google Gemini.
Everything was right there for us to see and we just chose to ignore it. I'm just kicking myself. Welcome to an all-new episode of the McFuture podcast, challenging the beliefs that run the world. I'm Steve Faktor, and like all great podcasts, this one will start with the host, that's me, quoting my own tweets. On April 26, 2023, I tweeted, AI won't just amplify our intelligence, but also our biases and disorders. AI will be an exponential, stealthy human amplifier, more than social media, as it's woven into our economic engine, not just our social lives. And I also clarified when I said our biases, I meant those who control and code its rules. And for disorders, I linked to an article that shows how intelligent people are likelier to have mental issues. And there's countless studies. Okay, maybe not countless. You could probably count them if you tried. There's a bunch of studies that point that out. Anyway, it did not take very long for Google to prove me right. Everything in that short sketch that we opened with is 100% true, actual results. The only one that I'm not 100% sure of is a joke at the end, which is Black Elon. So I think the prompt someone put in might have been, hey, generate a Black Elon. But other than that, every single bias there, and I left a bunch out. So there's a bunch of stuff on the cutting room floor that I didn't include. They've really just created kind of an Amos and Andy. I think it was the 30s and 40s. There was this super racist, I think it started out as a radio show and then became a TV show, where these two white guys in blackface would play these awful stereotypical black characters. And they got a ton of flack. So what they did was they just replaced the white guys in blackface with black characters playing the same stereotypes. And it was equally racist, maybe even more so. What's funny is Google has just created an Amos and Andy, but in the virtual world. And this is kind of a glimpse at the end point of where woke ideology goes or wants to go, except you're not supposed to see the underbelly, and we got to see it this time. And the bottom line is, this was a deliberate rewriting of reality. This was no accident. This was not, oh, we screwed up. It's sort of like someone apologizes. They're like, I'm sorry you feel offended. They're not sorry for what they said. So you have to watch the subtleties here. So Google's not sorry for what it did or even acknowledging that the mistake is the ideology that was fed into their AI in order to produce these awful results. They're sorry they let you see the underbelly. Everyone suspected Google had biases, right? So there are all these clues. Conservatives were always talking about how their news sources got downranked in search results. And then the Twitter and Facebook files came out and showed that they were complying with government and taking people down that weren't putting out the right narratives. And so Google was among those companies probably, but we didn't really have evidence. And we know that Google manipulates, in fact, I even have a thread on Twitter about this. They manipulate search results in favor of their own proprietary products. Like when Maps started replicating what Yelp was doing, Yelp ended up suing them because now anytime you look up a restaurant, it's going to be the Maps result. And they did the same thing with their travel service. So now if you look for flights, Google's travel service is going to be up there. So every time they acquire or develop some new feature that competes with other old search results that used to perform well, they have that data and they're like, hey, maybe we should acquire that service. But again, no one could really specify and no one really got a chance to look underneath the algorithms for those biases. I remember when Trump won, a couple of their senior executives, at least one, and I think it was the CEO of YouTube, but I'm not 100% sure, cried at an all-hands meeting after the election when Trump won in 2016. And they swore after that they will do everything within their power to control misinformation. Now, go ahead and figure out what misinformation is in a world where people regularly disagree on what is right and what is wrong. So who gets to decide what is misinformation? And even to this day, there are certain words I can't say and still have this video not either banned off YouTube, demonetized, which I'm not too worried about. I don't get enough views to worry about this as an income stream. But it's really crazy how much control over the narrative they have. And not only that, they don't even have to enforce it at some point because they got me to self-censor myself. I've seen other people fall by the wayside and get punished. So now I feel like I need to punish myself first before they get to do it. And this happened with Theo Vaughn, who has a very popular comedy podcast. I think he has over 2 million followers. And he had Roseanne Barr as a guest. And she made a joke about a certain event that happened to the people of the Semitic persuasion that I can't mention either in fear of getting downranked. And his podcast got a strike on his channel, which is a big revenue stream for him. And then I played on a previous episode, I don't think I'll play it here, the publisher or the former editor of Psychology Today talking about how the algorithms on Google, Facebook, and some of these other platforms can massively manipulate elections just by moving people towards a particular candidate, a particular type of story, a particular narrative, or maybe showing some people reminders to vote and not others. Anyway, so maybe I should play it here just so I could avoid being dinged. And again, this is a constant fear. And then you look at the political donations of Google employees. I think it's something like over 90% donate to only one party, the Democratic Party. So it is ideological monolith. There is no diversity inside those walls. I know they talk a lot about diversity at these companies. There is no diversity, especially when it comes to diversity of thought and politics. And I personally don't care what someone is. In fact, I think someone, regardless of their color, their political persuasion, whatever, has an obligation to do the best job possible. But in reality, how do you extract biases from human beings? I don't know how to do that. And even in things like the Google keyboard, it just won't do certain words. And sometimes it's curse words, so it'll not let you choose the curse word as the first word. It won't guess it as the first word. It might give it to you as a secondary option. But when I got an open source keyboard and tried doing that, it guesses the F word every time. So obviously it's not my typing, but it's their decision making. So again, these things are very subtle and they're baked into the algorithms. And who is making those decisions? What's in those algorithms? We will never know until now. What was revealed in the insane racist biases in Google's Gemini is way bigger than Bud Light. Bud Light just sent some customized cans to a trans influencer. Your belly won't know if you're drinking trans beer or just good old-fashioned regular Bud Light. Google is inside of our minds. This is a very different beast. Right now, their stock is plummeting, and it's not just because of the performance. Google's AI is not a big part of its business. Now, it could be disrupted by other people's AIs, but the reason I think people are punishing the stock, or have been for the last month or so, I think it's down like 12%, is no one knows how deep the rot in the organization is. And that rot will produce very biased and ultimately uncompetitive products. And this is a huge wake-up call, or should be a huge wake-up call to the organization. I know the CEO went out and apologized. That's not good enough. Heads have to roll, and possibly including his. Google has to show us the corpses. They have to let go of lots of people, including senior people. They have to go. You can't produce something like this because this is not just a bad product. This is the product of bad ideology that has been allowed to fester inside of an organization. And it's going to be amplified even more, and it's going to show up in a million other places. I would be like IDF hunting Hamas. Google employees would have to build tunnels underneath their fancy sushi bars to hide from all of the firings that would need to happen in that building. From this point on, people are going to be super critical of Google. They're going to poke and prod every single product that comes out and look for biases. Their trust was already low. I remember a while back, I did a survey on Google, and the question I asked was, let's say you're interviewing for a job at Google. Do you believe they will use information that's non-public that you have with Google products, whether it's Gmail or Google Docs or anything else, to see if you're a worthwhile candidate? I think 80% said yes, they would use that. I think another 10% said maybe, and then 10% said no. So already their trust levels are extremely low. So they picked a very weird time to poke that bear, because now you've got a lot of competitors. You've got OpenAI with Microsoft. You've got some open source projects that could end up being something. And their core product is not long for this earth. Search, people will not be searching much longer. You will want just the answer. And even Google knew that for the longest time. If you did Google voice searches on an Android phone, what it did was give you snippets that had the answer. It didn't even bother sending you to individual pages that produced those answers. And there was some lawsuits there as well. So it's all controversial how this data is used and how they're sourcing it. But the reality is that a lot of its products are commodities now. Cloud, everyone's got a cloud solution. The main benefit of Google's cloud is that it's got enough customers or users that it's sticky, and it's very hard to just move all your files over to something else. And a lot of people won't do it. So that buys you time, but it's not necessarily something unique. So if you're a new user, unless you get to me early, then I really have way more choices, right? I can go to Zoho Office, I can go to Microsoft, I can go to Adobe. All of them have comparable suites. And display ads, that's another thing. So unless we're talking their own inventory where you're kind of a captive audience, display ads are going away. People have ad blockers. In fact, ad blockers have become such a problem. And I wrote about this back in 2009 that it would be a problem, that YouTube has finally had to restrict people who are using them. This is a major threat to their core business. And Gmail too, it's not growing. People don't want to send and receive emails. People hate email. That's why they're using Slack, they're using WhatsApp, they're using all these other communication tools. So even Gmail, it's great right now. It gives them a place to show ads, but it's not a growth engine for the company. I actually think the strongest products Google has are Maps, because that's pretty indispensable for a lot of people. And they also have unique satellite technology that they purchased that gives them a level of detail that others just can't replicate because of the satellite images, and also because of government regulation. They're not allowed to give them certain levels of magnification. YouTube, I still think, is a spectacular platform that's very difficult to disrupt, but very easy to corrupt. And they're corrupting themselves, again, by making things so restrictive and by making it almost impossible to have true free speech. And they've opened the door for places like Rumble to start collecting some influential people like Russell Brand, who is a popular channel. But Russell Brand's doing a really smart thing now. He's showing like the first 15 minutes of his show on YouTube and then saying, hey, go to Rumble to watch the rest of it. So he's just using YouTube as advertising, and he knows that he can't say certain things on it, and he makes sure that in that first 15 minutes he doesn't. This is YouTube and Google handicapping themselves. No one's asking them to do it. Maybe the government's asking them to do it, but this is a legitimate self-sabotage of what I think is one of their most powerful assets. The other two are Android and Chrome. Chrome has huge market share. I mean, to the extent that people surf on desktop, and Android. Android also is suffering. They failed to go upstream and attract some of those wealthier customers. So a lot of the manufacturers are starting to drop off because they're not getting the rich people that they need to charge premiums like Apple does. They're still great assets, and that's where I would be building if I were them, but also I would need to get rid of the ideologues to make sure that we're not producing trash that is ultimately going to implode on itself. And this was just an exposure of what they were doing all along, except it was just so over the top because that's what AI is. It's an amplifier. It just scales infinitely very quickly, and everyone gets to see the results at the same time. And that's exactly what happened. They created a huge systemically racist AI that just happens to be, it was racist against whites, but still, all people are entitled to civil rights, not just people of color. I hope people realize that. And some people are like, well, are you going to let these people build your God? I'm like, forget about your God. Are you going to let these people run all of the internal functions in a corporation? You're going to let them run customer service at companies that you're dealing with? Are you going to let them run all of the services that you might need from the government? So do you want the people who coded this thing, this mutant, racist Amos and Andy monstrosity, to be in charge of all of the services that we get from whether it's private corporations or from governments? And that's where it's going. You're not going to be able to make an economic case for having a bunch of people in a room or at home or wherever answering questions or sending out information. It's just much more efficient to do it through AI. And so, yeah, that's going to be baked in. The people who produce this will produce something that screws people over at some point. And they're going to try to paper it over. They're going to try to hide all the obvious flaws, and just like they do with search. So it's not going to be clear to us exactly how biased it is, because it'll just be dealing in subtleties, and there'll be occasional hiccups. But that's the thing. You can't trust it from this point forward unless massive changes happen. And I don't think can afford to la-di-da through this whole thing and let them just paper over this. By making it stealth, people might let it fly for a while, and certainly people who maybe agree ideologically. I just, I don't know where people stand. I think so many people are just tuned out from this stuff. There's some people like me who are hyper connected and reading all this stuff and really on top of it. And there's people who, are actually raising their families, trying to make sure their kids aren't serial killers, and they just don't have time to do all this stuff. So I get it. But this is a fight worth having, because this is a battle for the mind. It's much, much bigger than some dumb beer that people consume. AI is just the latest round in disintermediation. I know it's a big word, but at some point you produce things at scale and you buy them through a store. So the store becomes the middleman. And then that middleman at some point got replaced by Amazon, because now it's just so efficient to get a bunch of stuff from China. And then Amazon also replaced the other middleman, which was the distributor. So that the distributor's gone. And so we're in this innovation phase that looks innovative, but really it's a substitution of one middleman for another, just a more efficient one. Same thing happened with Uber. You would look up in the yellow pages, which was also an intermediary, to call the car service. There was a guy there. You don't need any of that now. So now the middleman or the dispatcher is Uber. And search did the same thing to libraries. I was watching just recently an old movie with Jack Nicholson, Chinatown, and he went to the Hall of Records to look something up in these giant books. That entire building and all the people who manage it were disintermediated, and now you go online and you go to Google. Now, all that thinking is going to be done by AI, or at least a big chunk of it. It's a little bit more dangerous because now you're giving them even more power. Because before, if the search results were biased, you're like, okay, I might have to go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th page to find the stuff that I'm looking for because it's buried by their algorithm. But now, if you're just getting an answer, you don't know how that answer was produced. And so you just accept it. I guess this is fact. And that's a very dangerous place to be with algorithms. And Elon Musk is recognizing both the opportunity and the power of that. So his AI, which is now built into Twitter, is called Grok. And he just announced that they're going to be analyzing congressional bills through this AI to tell people exactly what's in it. Because these things are like 600, 700 pages sometimes. No one reads them, including the Congress people. And then they're expected to vote on them like the next day or something. It's really bizarre. There's this guy who just blew up over this in Congress.
And not the American way. These damn bills that come out here all the damn time come out here in the last second, and I gotta try to figure out how to vote for my people. How ashamed are you? You should be ashamed of yourselves. I'm sick of it. Every year, we give power to one person. It was not made that way in the Constitution. He was around when it was written. Now we pass rules that stop each one of us. Enough! I feel like somebody trying to be released from Egypt. Let my people go! My God, they sent me here to vote for them. They sent me here to vote for them, to argue for them. But I'm trapped. I'm trapped with my rules that have been forced down our throats. Folks, we live in a democracy, but not here. But not here.
It's just unfair to ask them to vote on these monstrous bills that have all these unrelated things in them and have no time to read it. Well, so Grok is going to do that. But then the question is, well, what biases are going to be built into Grok? And who's going to make sure that that isn't biased just like the Gemini algorithms are? So there's a bunch of calls to action that come out of this. And first and foremost, to competitors. They spelled out for them what not to do. All this crazy racial nonsense, we won't do that. Hey, our Elon Musk will be white. In fact, we could charge you a premium to generate him in other colors and races, but the one that you expect to get will probably be white. And the strategy is so simple. It's like, hey, we're not going to lie to you. We're not going to make up a fake reality. It's so simple. You could upsell the multiracial characters if that's what someone wants to do and they want to live in an alternate reality. That's great. Let them at it. But the trust issue is so important with these things because, again, they're giving you answers. They're giving you bookings of flights. They're giving you the end product of what you want. And you have to trust that that's the best one or as close to the best as they can do, because otherwise they undermine their entire business model. The more tricky part is for the US government. A lot of people are calling for regulation of AI, not specifically for this, for wild racism, but they think it has the potential to take over the world. And yes, it is a risk. I'm less concerned by that than I am by the absence of competition, because I think ultimately competition is what will allow us the freedoms and the choices that we expect. That is the backstop for all of this stuff. And that's why you want to avoid monopoly power. And the ultimate monopoly is government. So you have to try to avoid it being controlled by government or overregulated to a point where you end up picking winners because you set the bar so high for regulation, only the rich companies can afford to do it. And that's why OpenAI is pushing for this. Sam Altman went to Congress and said, yeah, this sure is dangerous. You guys better regulate us. Of course he wants regulation because they're ahead. They have a head start. And regulation just kind of calcifies them in. So I'm a little bit leery of regulation. I think competition is the reliable safeguard for preventing any one AI from being totally dominant. And libertarians and some conservatives especially have a hard time with this, which is the use of government force to ensure there's competition in order to prevent future government force, which will seek to squelch civil rights. Whenever an industry becomes concentrated, when you have Facebook and Twitter as the dominant platforms, when you have a handful of giant banks, it's so much easier for the government to go to them and say, hey, we need to kick off these people and we need to monitor these other people. And that's exactly what the government's been doing. It's much easier to do that when there are fewer companies and you can tell them what to do, as opposed to having a multiplicity of them and hopefully having them compete in such a way that gives us maximum freedom. So I don't think the solution is new technology or mass deregulation, as a lot of libertarians might want. But I think it's safeguarding competition. It's preventing shady IP monopolization. And this is going to be a real problem. Google just paid, I think, $60 million a year for exclusive access to Reddit's information, because they have these communities where they generate answers to all kinds of questions. So they're going to suck that into Google's AI to produce answers or to generate weird minority images. They have the money to throw around. And OpenAI is being sued by a bunch of publishers, by the New York Times and others, because they illicitly used, allegedly, the images and the information, articles, and books to train its AI to give answers. So again, this IP monopolization is going to be a huge problem. I'm not exactly sure how to regulate it, because I have a tough time telling a private company like Reddit, you can't give exclusive rights to this or that company. But you have enough of that happening, where all this buying up of data, you're not going to have a lot left over, or at least prime IP left over for open source AIs or competition that can give us freer outcomes. Also, lawsuits and bullying that giant companies normally do, they've put people out of business, just suing small startups or small companies. Best Buy, I remember, did that to some company that had a customer service idea that they pitched to them. And then long after that startup was bankrupt, it won the lawsuit against Best Buy. What good did it do? Because they essentially waited them out. And giant companies will also do a lot of corner cutting, and they're going to screw people over. Look at how Verizon and AT&T behave. Their whole legacy is the Bell monopoly, and they still behave in that way. Like, you look at all the fees they add on. You could have cable service, and then suddenly there's a new rental fee one month, and you have to call them up and argue with them. Like, they just make stuff up because they know that you have no other place to go. They're the only ones that were allowed to dig the wires underground to your house. That type of behavior is unavoidable when companies achieve market power. So I think it's important to have a counterbalance, and that's what the government has to do, and it hasn't done a very good job of it. And with AI, I honestly need to do a little bit more thinking about what that means. And again, the place I would start with is more competition. The other action item here is to Europe and Asia. They are in serious trouble. Europe has not produced a viable global software competitor, a social network or a SaaS company. They've got SAP, I guess, but that's, kind of outdated. This is a serious problem. They are not innovating in technology. They're regulating all these companies, but it's a limit to how much you can do, especially as their markets shrink because people are aging and they're not buying as many phones or as many devices. At some point, these companies will go, you know what? We don't need the trouble. We're just not going to sell here. They really need to up their game in terms of innovation. But more importantly, I think they need to invest in open source. And I'm talking about Japan, all the European countries. They need to be the arbiters of truth because the US is increasingly incapable of it because we've crippled ourselves with our idiotic politics. And you can see that with a certain Hachu that had been going around. The only studies that are trustworthy are the ones that are coming out of Europe because their universities aren't deranged. Same thing with transitioning, same thing with all of these other hot button issues here where people are afraid of being fired if they reveal the truth. Meanwhile, in the Nordics, they looked at the issue, said, hey, transitioning kids, not a thing that we want to do here because there's no evidence. And so they have no problem producing something like that where we will. And they have to do the same exact thing with AI. They have to get together and they have to bite the bullet and say, look, we're going to double down on honesty and not manipulation. And we're going to double down on open source and dedicate a bunch of developers, even if you don't have one great tech company that's like a Microsoft in Europe, or you don't have a great tech company. I mean, they have some manufacturers of hardware, but not software in Japan, for example. Then you know what? They all chip in or dedicate some resources and start building and use the collective intelligence and data and IP materials that they have at their disposal in order to prevent some of the dominance that's coming from the private sector of the US, which is now deranged, as evidenced by Gemini. On a personal level, I had already distrusted Google, and not so much, nothing personal about Google. It's just that I felt uncomfortable with so much of my data residing in one place. So I already switched to DuckDuckGo for search, which is pretty good. It uses Bing results, but anonymizes them. Start Page uses Google results. But again, these things are not long for this earth because those companies essentially are going to go away once people are getting their answers from AI. And then you're forced to be logged in. You're forced to be a subscriber. And there is no privacy anymore. Certainly the way these companies are playing it now. I've been de-Googling. I've de-Googled my phone. I put a different operating system. It's still Android-based, but it's completely open source. It's called Graphene OS. I'm about to do the same thing to my Google email that I use, as well as to some of these other services. It's not that Google is not capable of producing great products or acquiring companies and deploying them on a large scale. They are. They're still great at it, and it's still a great company, but the rot is there. And how deep is it? And how festering is it? And how easy is it to extract? I have no idea. But they have to take steps to do it. But in the meantime, I have to take steps because I can't allow a company that is under moral collapse to be in charge of my data. Do with that as you wish. And just philosophically, I wrote this to somebody who's like a tech blogger from the old days. He's a smart guy, but he took a very weird position about how he's okay with Gemini rewriting history. And I wrote, you can't study history if you rewrite it. That's what Stalin did. He essentially photoshopped people out of existence. He photoshopped them out of photos or airbrushed, and he deleted them. He sent them to work camps in Siberia, or he executed them. If you want a path to this inclusive future that everyone seems to be talking about, you have to write a better future history. You can't rewrite actual history. And it can't be achieved through force, through coercion, through manipulative narratives, and it certainly can't be done through revisionism. Any sustainable change has to change hearts and minds. Otherwise, it's going to be fought, resisted, and potentially defeated. And you look at a history of things like pot, and how our opinions have changed on that. Mass incarceration, gay rights, intermarriage. I mean, in the 50s, people, I think it was like 80+% were against mixed marriage. Now I think it's over 95% or something are fine with it. There is a way to get to that better future, but there are no shortcuts. You can't shortcut your way to this woke new world. You have to change hearts and minds. That means you can't call a bunch of people who voted for the guy you don't like racist. You can't put false narratives out there. You can't tell us what we see with our own eyes is not what we're seeing. Because eventually people will be onto you. And then it'll produce results like this, like Gemini, and people will never trust you again. So this is a very delicate moment in history. And I think this attempt to rewrite it is only going to undermine any nobility that exists in these causes. And we could debate what that is and if there is nobility, but the shortcuts that people have been taking are so wild to me. Instead of trying to make kids the best that they can be, and letting the chips fall where they may in terms of their professions and what they end up being in life. We're like, hey, let's get rid of testing. Because if the test doesn't exist, then their underperformance doesn't exist. And our underperformance as educators doesn't exist. That is a wild thing to do. That is a wild surrender of every duty that we have as a society. And we cannot afford it. So anyone who's advocating for that is destroying the society they're in. And we're doing the same thing with crime. Hey, why report? There's a whole bunch of cities that don't even report stats anymore to the FBI. So when you look at crime statistics, New York's not included, California's not included, a bunch of places that have high crime aren't included. So you can't even compare them year over year. You can't bury your head. You can't pretend that things aren't happening. You can't pretend that getting rid of police will improve the lives of the people that you claim you want to help. It's deranged. It's just deranged. And it's time that people started speaking up against it. Ultimately, you can't build stable societies on faulty narratives. You can't build on top of lies. Because then even if you get something right, let's say Gemini was okay and did kind of work and didn't have these wild racist outcomes and outputs. That doesn't mean that the core that produced it isn't broken. It would just mean that it's luck. You just get lucky if you put something out, if you're working with false narratives, if you don't have a foundation of truth beneath what you're doing or a foundation of morality. Then everything eventually is at risk of collapsing because the ground is not solid. Google at the moment is not building on solid ground. America at the moment is not building on solid ground. So you better fix that foundation before we keep building more, because everything we build is just going to be a lottery at this point. And it is pretty wild and pretty crazy that we're not trusted anymore to evaluate things with our own eyes. Like there was an article that came out, Shane Gillis, who was fired from SNL for an edgy joke years ago, like 2019 or 2020. And he just came back to host, which was a huge victory for people against cancel culture. And some blogger wrote, and I'm sure he wrote this opinion before the show even aired, he said how people weren't laughing at the monologue. People were laughing. But because of the bias that this person has, he or she or whatever pronoun has to prove that didn't happen. But we all have ears, we all have eyes, we can see it. So this denial of reality, who does it serve? Because at some point people will see. Same thing with the insurrection, where yeah, you can tell us it's the greatest terrorist events in American history, but we saw a bunch of douchebags taking selfies at the podium in the main chamber and then being shepherded in and out by security guards. So which is it? Is it the most horrific event in the history of America? Or is it a bunch of goofballs who, yeah, some of them should be arrested and serve time and do whatever. But to characterize it a certain way requires us to not trust our own eyes or get so deep into our own biases that we produce a world like Gemini. And it's very hard to maintain that world because it requires a lot of force to maintain these denials of reality. You almost have to be surrounded by other crazy people to keep reinforcing the lack of evidence that your own senses can pick up on. I thought back to a quote that I thought was profound at the time, and it's proven to be very prescient by Brett Weinstein, and he said in 2018 on the Joe Rogan show. And this was in reference to his own ousting from the university because these students accused him for being racist for saying he won't stay home the day they said white professors shouldn't come into work. It was like a day without whites. And he's like, that's racist. I'm not doing it. And he gave a rationale for it. And then he was chased by students threatening his life. And he said there are two movements happening at the same time, an equality movement and a subordination movement. Most can't tell the difference because until you get to equality, both point in the same direction. Well, this product that they produced, this is the subordination mentality, saying we're going to build this thing so it can't even produce white people. That is the subordination component that he was talking about. And we're finally seeing it laid bare in front of us. And it really goes to show how much the people that accuse you of certain things, of racism, of erasure, of every interaction being about power, how much the accusation is a deflection from what their tactics are. Hopefully the tide is turning. I'm seeing positive evidence that it is. We need two realignments to happen. Realigning our narratives with reality. We need to have a reality-based society again. And we also need to realign virtue signaling with actual virtue. You don't get to pretend to be virtuous or better than others without doing things that show that you're better. And most people who truly are better are too busy to be signaling. They're out there doing the good things. And the more people we have doing the good things than saying the right things, the better our society will get. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell others, tell a friend, support the show on patreon.com. And I will see you next time on the McFuture. A lot of companies in Silicon Valley, especially in San Francisco and some of these other places, have assembled a lot of crazy people whose craziness has blossomed because they've been triggered by Trump or whatever, who knows. They are very wealthy people who are so woke and yet live the most conservative lives and support policies that keep down the people they say they want to help. I'll just give you some examples. They support the 70% who don't go to college, subsidizing the 30% who do go to college and who will eventually out-earn them. The state and local tax deduction, which only rich people get in New York and California. The mortgage deduction has a disproportionate benefit. The richer you are, the more expensive the house is. They support failing public schools for poor people, but their kids go to private schools. Or if you live in a rich enough neighborhood, your kid's effectively going to a private school because they have infinite funding from the parents. They also support the tax deduction on health insurance. So the more luxurious your plan, the bigger the deduction. So we're, as a society, subsidizing the most luxurious plans at Google and Microsoft and all these companies where people get paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. They are more likely to own homes, have nuclear families, get married before they have kids, all of these conservative principles, and yet they embrace all of these things, at least cosmetically, that ultimately hurt people, that will subvert their lives because they don't get to live them the same way that they do, the same conservative way that they live, even though they're superficially liberal. They are also very wealthy people who can afford to live in denials of reality. They are architecting the world that they want, not the world that is actually out there. We don't have carte blanche. We don't have carte blanche. How do you say that? You don't get to signal you don't get to say